Good evening. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Dr. Stacy Mitchell. I lead the Career and Life Design Office at the Johns Hopkins University School of Education, and I'm delighted to serve as your host and moderator for this evening's conversation. Tonight's event, Committed to Community, Ed Policy Alumni on Purpose-Driven Careers, is presented by the Johns Hopkins School of Education in partnership with Hopkins at Home. We're excited to bring together alumni whose work reflects a deep commitment to community engagement, advocacy, and equity-centered change within education. This conversation is especially for those who are thinking about how academic interests, particularly in education policy, can translate into meaningful, people-focused careers. We'll talk about navigating professional pathways rooted in service, the realities of working across systems and communities, and how values like collaboration and equity show up in day-to-day work. Whether you're interested in policy, nonprofit leadership, on-the-ground organizing, or are simply figuring out what purposeful work looks like after graduation, we're so glad that you're here. I'm thrilled to be joined tonight by two outstanding School of Education alumni. First, we have Trianna Downing, a 2025 graduate of our Master of Science Education Policy program. Trianna currently serves as a Community Action Team Specialist for Wards 2 and 3 within the Office of External Affairs at DC Public Schools. In this role, she works to strengthen transparent and meaningful engagement between schools, families, and communities across the district. Her career is grounded in advocacy, collaboration, and a belief in the power of partnerships to drive systemic change. We're also joined by Emma Banay, a 2023 graduate of the Master of Science in Education Policy program and a portfolio manager at Overdeck Family Foundation, where she leads the Inspired Minds portfolio. Emma's work focuses on expanding access to high-quality STEM learning opportunities and supporting the next generation of confident, creative problem solvers. Her background spans direct service, field building, and cross-sector partnership work, including leading STEM initiatives and teaching middle school science. Before we begin, two quick notes for those watching live. First, everyone please check in using the form that's shared in the chat. This is especially important for our Ed Policy students in attendance because February is Ed Policy Month, and students who attend at least 2 of our 4 events throughout the month, this one included, will be entered into a raffle for some School of Ed swag, so don't miss out. Secondly, everyone, please remember that you're welcome to submit questions throughout this program using the chat feature. We'll be monitoring questions and we'll do our best to include as many as possible during the Q&A portion toward the end of the conversation. So now we'll move into our panel discussion with Trianna and Emma. First up, let's talk a little bit about career journey. Please, both of you, share a snapshot of your career path after graduating from SOE's Ed Policy program. Specifically, how did you end up in your current position, and what does your job entail? Trianna, if you would like to get us started.
Sure, absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Trianna Downing. As Dr. Mitchell shared, I work within the Office of External Affairs for DC Public Schools, serving as a Community Action Team Specialist for Wards 2 and 3. My career journey following my graduation from SOE started pretty quickly after graduation. Before the program and during the program, I was serving as a community communications and community engagement coordinator for our state board of education for an initiative called the Special Education Hub, really working with partners externally, internally to help families navigating special education within our district public schools and charter schools. Then, following graduation, I really learned that my passion for education was also rooted in community engagement and meaningful community engagement at that. Was fortunate to see a posting for DCPS for the Community Action Team Specialist and transitioned over there in September 2025. So the role is still fresh. I've been there now a little over 100 days, but still learning every single day. In my role, as shared, I work closely with our school communities and make sure that there is a liaison between the school community and the Central Services Office. So that can range very differently depending on the needs of the schools. Wards 2 and 3 in DC, if you're not familiar, are essentially the more I'll say a demographic in which that are quite privileged, predominantly white neighborhoods that does not embody the entire school community, of course. In DC, education is actually based on a lottery-based system. So we have students from all across the city going to schools, regardless of where they live in the city. That said, again, a lot of my schools in wards 2 and 3 predominantly advantaged white students. And then we've got students who are coming again from all over the city and just working to ensure that there is a equity-based approach in the way that we're supporting our students across the city when they are attending schools in wards 2 and 3. And so I work closely with our parent organizations like PTOs or PTAs. We also have what we call LSATs or local school advisory teams that help inform the principal on school budget and school priorities, working closely with their LSAT to make sure that what they're talking about informs the goals of the school and the former goal of the goals of DCPS as a whole. And so I just am very fortunate to be able to do work that aligns with my goals of working closely in partnerships, building that equity-based community practice, and then also working so closely with our school communities and still in the realm of education. So that is what I'm doing now. Like I said, just started, so there's still a lot that I'm learning, but really fortunate that I could mix my two passions into a job that is really kind of almost perfect for me.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful, and congrats on the new
Thank
position.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Emma, how about you?
Great. Well, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for including me and excited to be in conversation with Trianna as well. My career path after the program actually started a few months before I wrapped up the program. I did the ed policy program part-time while I was working at New York City's after school intermediary. That's an organization that sort of sits between the city agencies that oversee publicly funded after school programs in New York. And actually, the one of the funders of the nonprofit where I was working had an opening for a program officer position just as I was wrapping up the program. And the fates really aligned. I applied for the position and was able to start just a month or two before the ed policy program wrapped up. One of the reasons that I had been interested in the ed policy program, of course, in addition to all of the rich learning and connection to peers in the program, was that I really thought that a master's degree would sort of open up a new tier of opportunities for me professionally. And that was certainly true. The ed policy program gave me experience, a breadth of content knowledge that helped move me to another opportunity that I probably wouldn't have been qualified for without the program. So the fates really aligned in terms of timing and also in terms of sort of connections between the nonprofit where I had been working and then the private foundation where I wound up after graduation. For those who don't know, Overdeck Family Foundation is a private philanthropy based out of New York City, but we fund education programs nationally. So we're a grant-making organization. I lead a portfolio that's focused on out-of-school time STEM experiences. So really translating my background in publicly funded out-of-school time programs in STEM education, and now in the really lucky position to be able to help mobilize resources and support to nonprofit organizations on the ground doing amazing work in community. So what does my current job entail? There's a couple of different facets. First is sort of sourcing and diligence, getting to know all of the amazing nonprofits out in the field doing incredible work that are aligned to our strategies, trying to figure out which ones are a good fit with our grant-making approach. Second is around actually making recommendations to our board once we've done all of that sourcing and diligence, making recommendations about which organizations we think we can have a deeper relationship with and be able to fund. And then my favorite part of the job is a lot of coaching and support for our grantees. So once we're funding them, how do we help them achieve their goals? What support can we provide beyond the dollars, beyond the check, so that they are able to succeed in their missions and visions? And then finally, I also do a fair amount of a sort of networking and thought leadership in the field. So being able to co-author op-eds with our grantees or present in conferences to be able to highlight the amazing work of our grantees. So trying to be a sort of megaphone for their amazing work and be able to keep the spotlight on the really important issues that matter to our foundation, like access to high quality out of school time programs and STEM learning opportunities for young people.
Great. Thank you so much, Emma. Now, I would like us to focus a little bit on where our title is coming from. So the title of our panel is Committed to Community. So let's reflect a little bit on that. How do each of you define community? Maybe it's students, families, local districts, something entirely else, a combination. How do you define community, and how do you engage with community in your work? Trianna, if you'd like to go first.
First of all, a really great question. So I think my definition of community actually comes from what my mother always refers to as the village. I am an identical twin, and when she found out 7 months pregnant and that she was having identical twins, the first thought in her head was who can I lean on for this support? She had my dad with her, he's a great, lovely guy, but also his, thoughts are racing about just more so the money issue. How do you pay for identical twins at all? And then having the conversation with my mom of it's going to take a village to raise these twins. We turned out great, I think. I think we're awesome individuals, but I can only imagine what they went through to raise twins. And so when I think about community, I think about a village. In my personal capacity, in my personal life, the village is not only my close family, my close friends, it is also the mentors that I've made, especially those within the SOE community, those I've taken classes with, the professors, as well as those I've networked with at different opportunities similar to opportunities like these. It was also those who got me even through undergrad, the professors I had there, uh, upperclassmen that I could lean on when I was taking tough classes. I mean, the village is really kind of what you make it and who can be there to support you through the toughest of times. When I think about community within the schools that I work with, it can be a lot of different things. I mean, it's not only the teachers in the school building, the administrators in the school building, individuals from central services where I am and working with. It's also the after school program leads that I know Emma works closely with. It's also the other students around those students who uplift them, get them excited to go to school every day. I love hearing about how kids say their favorite aspect of school is their friends. That makes me so grateful. Just knowing that sense of belonging, that sense of community is there even at their young ages. So thinking about the community is really thinking about the villages. And I would love in my role, and I love that I have the opportunity to help build those communities within our schools. So knowing and sharing who the partners are, internally or externally, being able to connect different schools with or my schools within wards 2 and 3 with different schools across the city, east of the river, those just northwest, those northeast, just building that capacity and building the sense of belonging in the larger sense of DCPS and not just those, again, within the school building. But yeah, I mean, I immediately just thought of that word, that sense of the village. And I'm hoping that we can continue building that as I'm in this role and the team that I work so diligently with, and then the schools that I'm serving.
Thank you so much. I love that reflection on belonging and togetherness and connection, right, in relation to the
Absolutely.
family. Emma, what do you think?
It's interesting. I think for me, one of the interesting transitions into my current role was really being one step even further removed from working directly with educators and young people, which I had been doing at the nonprofit where I worked prior to my current role. And so for me, really the community that I engage with most directly is the community of grantees in my portfolio at the foundation. And so one of the responsibilities that I take really seriously is how to cultivate opportunities for collaboration and connection and peer learning among that amazing network of nonprofit leaders, executives, CEOs. And so that includes informal touch points when I know that folks are working on something similar or facing a similar challenge in their work. How can I get them linked up to have someone to commiserate with and bounce ideas off of? But it also takes more sort of formal forms. We often run communities of practice or workshop series that help bring together our grantees around common learning opportunities. And we also host an annual convening each year to not just learn and work together, but to foster a true sense of community among grantees who often are working toward shared goals and can identify even more concrete ways to work together and support one another when we help create that space together.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's so clear that even though your roles are different, right, this idea of community truly is central, no? And it's clear also that both of your roles and your work center on that promotion of educational access and advocacy, these types of things, right? So I'm wondering if you both could speak to why the conversation around equity and educational policy is important and how, or if you've seen that conversation shift over time.
Yeah, I mean, I just the work itself to be able to be a community action team specialist within DC is already that I think that sense of equity that I know other schools are striving to, even other districts are striving to um, replicate. I think th the fact that there are schools that are struggling still to have even any sorts of liaising between school communities and central services, families feeling that they have never heard from the district or they hear too much from the district or it's only about the bad things, the good things, and then having someone to be able to go directly to schools and speak directly to the community is like, I think that's a piece of equity that is oftentimes missing from the school communities and just the larger school districts. So again, very fortunate to be able to do this type of work because I know it sounds very, I mean, it is very unique within itself. That also said, I think a shift I have noticed throughout education is a good one, and I think could be progressed even further. I grew up as a Black student in a predominantly white public school. Um, when I did get to a more diverse population, by the time I went to middle and high school, I was in a more diverse school building. However, still oftentimes the Black student in an honors class and then in high school AP class or pre-college course, however it was. And that I can see a shift happening a lot and a lot of times here in DC because of how diverse our city is. And I do see a shift even in the schools that I was attending in Minneapolis, which is where I'm from. But it could be better. There's still lots of work to do to have more students feel that sense of belonging earlier in their school careers instead of later in life. I feel like it was getting better as I was going through middle school. It got a lot better when I went to high school, but by the time I left, then going to college, it kind of felt like I was starting back at ground zero, where I needed to reinsert myself into spaces where I didn't feel quite as not welcomed, but I just still didn't see a lot of myself in my other classmates, in my professors. And I think that's just an ongoing battle that we should be honest with ourselves as we continue to do equity-centered work, as we continue to talk about community, as we continue to just see education for what it is, and who it's supposed to be supporting and helping. But again, I still see the benefits. I see the shift. I see the progression. I just would push it to be even further than we are now. So,
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I really appreciate you, like acknowledging the difficulties and the obstacles and the challenge. And yet
yeah,
there is this space for hope and growth. And
absolutely.
that's so crucial to drive the work forward. So thank you so much for
Of course.
that about. Emma, how about you?
Yeah, our work at the foundation really focuses on access to out of school time learning experiences. And that's one of the parts of the educational field where we see really divergent access among families based on income, based on race, based on geography. And so one of the ways that we've approached that at the foundation is to really actually try and get a handle data-wise on what are the discrepancies in terms of access, working with grantees to better understand what is the state of demand for after-school programs across the US, what's the supply, where are the biggest gaps, and then what are the ways that public funding, that private philanthropy dollars, that can help fill in the gap to make sure that all young people have access to programs that can support their enrichment and development and growth. And we've seen that shift over time. Unfortunately, in the out of school time sector, we've seen some backsliding. The sort of most recent data that was released in 2025 shows that affluent families are spending 9 times more than lower income families on enrichment and out of school time activities. And this is happening at a time where the sort of public funding for out of school time is increasingly unpredictable and volatile. So it's a moment where I think the field has to get serious about what are the ways of operating that promote access for young people, that make sure that all kids have safe and enriching and supportive places to be in the non-school hours, and getting creative about what the sources of funding will be to be able to do that. So it's a focus. I know we'll talk a little bit later about like sort of areas that might be overlooked in education. I think out of school time sometimes gets sort of short shrift, but it's a place where we're really focused and recognize there are some really persistent access issues in the field, and solving them will require, I think, a lot of different stakeholders to work together to make sure that young people are able to participate, because we know the demand is there. Kids want to be there, families want to be there. It's how to make that possible for everyone who wants it.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm glad that you mentioned that the after school space is one that's kind of, not always included in the conversation, because that's kind of what I was thinking. And I was saying to myself, oh, I wonder if we'll be able to hear more about that. So I'm looking forward to it. But let's talk a little bit about, life after graduation. So if you could both talk to us a little bit about what skills, qualities, or ideas did you cultivate as a student in the Ed Policy program that have proven crucial in your work today, right? We have students in the audience. We also have staff, faculty, alumni, but we do have our students. So what skills should someone looking to get into educational policy prioritize to be more marketable in this field?
Right off the bat, I'm thinking research skills. Those were so crucial. I did not do my undergrad in education, and I, going into the program, I definitely like had some background in research and how to find the right sources, how to cite things, but also just didn't understand or know about the plethora of research papers, of magazines, of different writings that were done by education, like education policy wonks, that I could learn so much from. I now spend extra hours of my own time just reading about different research that comes out, about education, not only about, things that are happening in the school day, but to Emma's point, like things that are happening in the out of school time programs, the enrichment activities that students can do, and what it actually does for their mental health, for their physical health, for their grades. I am like a huge kind of like tech wonk, and how technology can drive education, but also can be kind of, its own beast within itself, of how do we teach students to be mindful users in an AI generation, or even I love young students, and oftentimes will babysit young little kids, and the parents will say, is it okay for them to watch TV? And I'll say, oh my God, I just read research about here are the types of TV shows that are appropriate for these ages, and actually what they take away. I think that was just really I think that was just something that I really appreciated. I got out of the education program, just being able to be exposed to all of this great writing, these great sources, these great speakers, and then learn even more about education, that even if we weren't talking about it in class, I could find time within my own capacity to be able to learn even more. So in my roles now, we'll oftentimes talk about, well, this, that, or the other is informed by what? And I'll say, again, I found this research paper, I read this, actually, this was talked about on the Hill the other day, blah, blah, blah. I think I just really owe a lot to the program for teaching me those routes and teaching me where that information was, where that was stored, and how it could be helpful in the roles that I do now.
Great. Thanks so much. Writing and research, they always come in handy, always crucial. Emma, how about you? What skills or qualities or ideas?
Yeah, I mean, definitely agree on the writing. And I think in particular, the sort of different kinds of writing. I remember an assignment where we sort of had to make the same argument in the form of a policy brief and in the form of an op-ed, and sort of flexing the different forms of communication and the style of communication. Um, Recognizing that different audiences respond to different ways of presenting information and communicating information. That's something I've used directly in my work basically every day since graduating the program, and was just getting those reps in was super helpful. Um, Second, something that I think is maybe useful to reflect on for current students is sort of the knowledge base that you're coming in with, and then what you help the program or hope the program might help you do. So for me, I came in with like a very deep and specific knowledge base around after school and STEM, and actually wanted to use the program to become a little bit more of a generalist. I felt like I didn't know as much about sort of broader history and trends in educational policy. I wanted to be more conversant in education reform, in the selection of standards and so on. And so I think knowing, are you coming in with a sort of general background that you want to get deeper into a specific policy area in the program, or the opposite, can help you sort of be smart about how to use your time and your learning and decide where to double down and where to maybe go in a new direction. Um, and then I guess the last thing I'll say is that I feel like one thing that I was able to do in the ed policy program, in part because I wanted to do like a little bit more of that dabbling, was sort of learn how to learn quickly about education policy. So like, what are the resources that I can go to? What level of information is sort of enough to be able to make a cogent argument? When is it worth combing through all of the research studies and getting a deeper understanding? So almost that like metacognitive skill of like, how do I learn and how do I learn about how I learn so that I can do that quickly when I need to in a professional setting post graduation. So those were three things that I felt like I really got a lot of practice in as a graduate student in the program, and that I use like directly in my job all the time.
I think one more thing, Emma, you kind of like light bulb in my head was a reflection of the why that I learned in a lot of my classes, or the how. So I'm thinking of education finance. I knew that there was just a bucket of money somehow, somewhere that came down the pike into education. But learning about the why or the how, how some states are managing their funding, or where they get their funding to manage their schools, how schools get supplemental funding for this, that, or the other. Working in special education was really an eye-opener for me, especially in DC, how we're funding education and how we're funding special education, but learning it at a federal level and understanding what Title I funds are, or what the special education funds are, and how those are driven to support our students, answered a lot of, well, I don't know if even answered is the right, just had me realize the how and the why of how even our schools are run. I think actually like all the classes in some way had me have those aha moments of, oh, that makes sense now. And I don't think I would have done that had I not been in this program and taken some of those classes to learn what I didn't know about education.
Thank you both so much. Those are such great points. Just reflecting on research and writing skills, that idea of metacognition, knowing the whys and the hows, the ins and outs of things. And I'm hearing kind of a common thread also, of coming into this with an objective, not only the program, but into this work too, right? Like having a goal, having an idea, and taking charge of that learning process, right? We are all agents of our learning journey and our understanding. So to enter these spaces with that curiosity and to feel empowered to pursue that knowledge. That's something that was kind of resonating for me as you all were speaking. So let's move on to another question. And I'm looking forward to this one. How, if at all, has your work shifted as the national policy landscape shifts? So, for instance, have you experienced any changes in funding or regulations? And how have you worked to adapt to these while maintaining a sense of purpose or direction in the work? Trianna, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I can start. So I will say again, like as a disclaimer, working for the district, it's only been about a little over 100 days. So I'm still learning about how the federal landscape and the national landscape of education informs how we work as a district. But I can speak to my prior experience on the State Board of Education, which is kind of confusing within itself because DC is not a state. We're a District of Columbia. We operate very similarly to a state in some capacity, but we also don't have representation in the House or the Senate. We don't have a governor. We have a mayor. We have a council. And I mean, other governing bodies, but issue being because we're not a state, a lot of federal policies then drive how we can operate or how we did operate as a state board. So the state board was essentially an advisory board to the LEAs or to the Office of the State Superintendent for Education. Again, using the word state when our city isn't one, it can be a little confusing, but in that case, DC does have what's called home rule and does oversee its education. And luckily, this, using having OSSI, having DC public schools, our DC charters, being able to drive education as a separate entity from the nation, or however, federal law tells us to do is great. However, there were some instances in which, for instance, um, when I was working for the State Board of Education, the federal government, the House Republicans had taken away money from DC's operating budget. This budget was already approved by Congress because actually DC needs to get its budget approved by Congress for the fiscal year. So when that money was taken away, the state board, we had to put a pause on even hiring. We had to put a pause on some of our operating budget for our programs. We had to be very strategic about how we used money to support the work that we were doing because that money had been frozen. Um, I mean, that's difficult within itself to not be able to have programming, in our case, working to help inform families about special education. So their rights, information about IEPs or 504s, having families know, hey, here's where you go to for advocacy resources, here's who you can call for this concern or this question or however have you. It was difficult. It is difficult to not have the freedom to be able to do so because, again, we are in a state. So a lot of the work that I was doing on the state board, and even now, it just feels really politically driven because of the lack of representation that we have as, as a city. We are 700,000 plus strong. I think we're larger, even have a larger population than I think the state of Wyoming. But again, without that representation, it can be really difficult and hard to navigate how to be supportive without feeling that we could have retaliation from the federal government, which is literally just down the street. That said, again, fortunately, we have you know, kind of like our own governing body over the state of education in DC, but sometimes you're not sure how something's gonna be changed overnight, or if, somehow it comes up that DC schools or DC education landscape is going to be different to how the federal body wants us to operate. And that can be really, I mean, again, it's a difficult situation to be in. It was while I was working for the state board. But I think the way that we're working and the way that we're operating now is really promising. Our students are doing very, very well academically, and we're only growing. And so my hope is that it just continues the path, or we continue the path that we're on. But again, you know, we it feels like we can never really be sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for sharing. Emma, how about you?
I think in my work, the impact has really been on our grantee community. Many of them have faced shifts in available funding, not just federal grants that may have been canceled or postponed, but some trickle down effects. There's been ripples sort of in the corporate funding sector and sort of across many different revenue streams for grantees. Um, and at the same time, I think our grantees have been really resilient thinking about what opportunities may be open for them. So as education is like even further decentralized towards the states, many of our grantees have been thinking about what policy opportunities exist at the state level and how they can position themselves to take advantage around that. I mentioned earlier that sort of one of my favorite parts of the job is around the support that we provide sort of beyond the check. And so this past year, we've done really extensive capacity building and workshop series for our grantees to help them get up-to-date access to information that can help them make those pivots in light of the shifts in the policy landscape. So connecting them with policy experts who can help them do some analysis about which states might be a good fit for them given their scale strategy or their offerings, helping them think about the sort of messaging that might resonate in one state versus another, helping them think about unexpected sources of public revenue that they might be able to tap into that might diversify their revenue model and make them a little bit more sustainable and more resilient. So we've been really impressed by grantees' grace and resilience and creativity in navigating the current moment. And we've tried to be a partner to them in that by providing support, resources, access to policy experts in the field to help them be able to navigate some of those changes. So it's shaped my work a little bit in that we've sort of been able to pivot to provide that kind of coaching and support. But really, it's been focused on how can we help our grantees navigate this moment since they're facing, I would say, like more direct impacts from many of the shifts in the policy landscape.
Thanks so much to you both for talking us through some of those nuances and complexities. I feel like that, we all know that the current moment impacts this kind of work, but sometimes, how exactly is not so obvious. So thank you so much for walking us through that. We have a couple more questions to finish up. I just want to remind our audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please put them in the chat and we will get to that in just a few minutes. Like I said, I have a couple more questions for us though. And the next one is, what is one important aspect of our education system that you believe is frequently misunderstood or left out of conversations about policy, community, and educational access? Emma, I'm gonna throw this one to you.
Spoiler alert, you already know my answer. I'm so excited about this question because I love talking about out of school time programs, whether that be before care, after school programs, or summer learning experiences. There's some not controversy, but some disagreement about how the math works out. But some estimates say like as much as 80% of young people's time is spent outside of school, and really paying attention to the kinds of enrichment and educational experiences that they have in those settings is really critical for thinking holistically about their lived experience, the educational opportunities they have, and the ideas and communities that they come into contact with. So we at the foundation focus most of our work on after school and summer, mostly in sort of structured programs like after school programs or summer camps. But we also recognize and appreciate the importance of a wide range of sort of informal learning settings, whether that be at the library, at a science museum. There's lots of really creative organizations doing work to like make learning opportunities at the laundromat, books, and ways for families to engage. So like lots of ways to take advantage really of sort of like every moment of a young person's life to maximize the learning and sort of creativity that's possible there. Um, and one of the things that Trent, I loved to hear you say earlier was like the ways that you do work within the wards where you are working to connect the sort of after school staff with the school-based staff. And that's one of the things that we're really excited about at the foundation is like, how can we aim for a more integrated and coherent system where young people are known and supported across all the settings where they learn, where adults in their lives are sort of working together to support young people. And I think the out of school time programs are a really critical part of that that often get overlooked because they aren't the sort of like academic drivers necessarily, but they're serving really other important functions in terms of peer and adult connection, enrichment opportunities, space to have fun, spaces of safety, and ways to learn that are more flexible perhaps than what's always possible during the school day. So I could talk about the importance of after school and out of school time programs all day, but maybe I'll leave it there because I'm curious what Triana has to say.
No,
So much.
I love your passion, Emma. Like it gets me so excited. And I'm even thinking back to my own experience, especially in elementary school. I don't think there was an after school program that my sister and I would go to, but it essentially was, like homework and then you were out on the we went out to recess for the rest of the evening until your parents are coming to pick you up. Not to say that that wasn't a great experience, but I think that enrichment piece is what is, a driving force in a student's academic success, or at least one of them. I think when I think about programs, especially in my position now, or even my position at the state board, was just the power of the parent voice through the parent organization. So the PTO, the PTA, they're also called homeschool associations as well, so HSAs, getting used to all the acronyms. But though that program, that type of programming, I think is so powerful. I think oftentimes, sometimes people can hear PTO and kind of clench up because, there's the stereotype of like the really, really angry parents who are just there to yell and like, have snide comments about whatever the principal or administration is saying. But, in my role and also working with my team, it is pretty incredible and amazing to see the dedication of some families that are not exhibiting that stereotype are instead the ones who are asking questions, who are really dedicated to the school community, not only their own students, but the whole school community. I was in a PTO meeting this week where the families were talking about some ways that they wanted to drive more community, more culture within their school. And so talking about, can we do a spelling bee? And I had mentioned that one of my teammates had worked at a spelling bee that was actually bilingual for their Spanish speaking families and their English speaking families. And the turnout for that spelling bee was huge. And trying to replicate that at another school that has a similar population, I think, goes with their goal for driving that community, that sense of belonging within their school. And that comes out of the PTO. Those are the ones who, again, they're not just looking out for their own students, they're looking out for their entire school community and working together and thinking about how to raise funds for that, who to contact, who to work with. I think it's just, I mean, it's a beautiful thing, but it just comes to show these are oftentimes, I think, maybe the word isn't overlooked, but maybe just kind of passed aside because, again, stereotype being sometimes the PTO can just be this angry mob, but reality is a lot of these PTOs are just the dedicated community members of the school community who really just want to see their students just thrive in their schools, see other students thrive in their schools, so see the staff thrive, and just see again the whole district just do well, just out of one parent group. So I think I'm even thinking about my parents' experience in the PTO. My mom was not involved at all, but as I tell her about some of these really uplifting and really passionate voices within the PTO, she thinks she probably could have, played ball with some of these parents and maybe made it into something that replicating the experiences that I'm having now. But that was then, and this is now. And I just think that if we could replicate more of PTOs and organizations similar to the ones that I've been going to, I think we can see some real positive and progressive change within our school communities.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for talking about those topics. I felt passion, and the commitment to those things, as both of you were speaking, you emerging as thought leaders in this space. It's very inspiring. And, it's just been a joy to chat with you both and to listen to all these things. And I think that this is a great place to move into a Q&A with our audience. So once again, audience, if you have any questions that you're thinking about, please feel free to share them. And I just want to take a look and see what we have in the chat, what's been coming in. So first of all, we have a question from Cindy. This question is related to Emma's comments on equity. So farther back at the beginning of our conversation, she asks, what have you found are the biggest barriers to creating a sense of community? And is funding the biggest hurdle or the only hurdle?
Yeah, I'll say a couple things here. One, we do see funding and cost of programs as one of the biggest barriers that parents and families report in terms of access to out-of-school time programs. But there are other ones that we see as well, things like transportation. So if families don't have a way to drop off or pick up to programs, then it's not possible or practical to attend. Another one is actually just like awareness because the out of school time programs are sort of so decentralized and are offered by a range of usually small sort of community-based organizations. It can actually be really hard for parents to know what's available in my community, which one's a good fit for my kid, where is it located. So just actually that sort of awareness and knowledge can be a barrier. And then sort of building on the conversation Trianna and I were having earlier, I think another one of the barriers, more on the sort of sense of community part of your question, is that out of school time programs can often be sort of treated separately. And so there's often issues even about like access to space within a school building. Teachers may not want after school educators in their room or sharing materials. And so it doesn't always to young people feel like a cohesive school community broadly defined, they feel like pretty separate. And so there's lots of interesting work happening on the ground to understand like how can providers work more closely with the school administration, with the teachers to better integrate, perhaps have shared norms around behavior management, around family communication. And I think all of those things can really support a sense of school community more broadly, where the after school is one part of a bigger whole and really recognized as a partner.
Yeah, I'm reflecting back and I like had just mentioned, my mom was not a parent that was involved with the PTO, because she honestly just didn't, quite frankly, did not like the vibe that they were bringing out. And I think there was also a sense of distrust that she felt with some of the members, just because, again, this is a Black mother raising Black children in a predominantly white school and having some interactions with not only parents in the PTO, but also teachers within the organization who had unfortunately said some questionable opinions, thoughts about my experience being in their class or another Black or brown student in their class. And it was a turnoff for her. Why would she spend more time with these individuals if she didn't feel welcomed? And that doesn't just go for PTO, but I think it goes for a lot of these experiences with some parents or communities trying to build relationships or relationship build within their school communities where they feel that lack of trust or they feel that lack of welcoming when they enter the space. I think, research shows that multilingual learners, students with disabilities, oftentimes our Black and brown students are those who feel the least sense of belonging within their school communities, and that is fueled by, years and decades of just I mean, you could talk about racial inequity in education. You can talk about redlining in education. I mean, there, like the list goes on, but that sense of distrust or hesitation to become one within your school community because of the way that you either have seen or you've experienced is one that makes it really difficult to then try and say, but no, you should really be a part of our school community. We want you to be in our school community. The damage has been done. And, I think oftentimes the ball, and fairly, is in the court of the family who says whether or not they actually would like to start a dialogue or join the community at all. I think there are definitely ways for a school to rectify those issues. Even acknowledge those concerns, those issues, bring about programming that makes people feel welcomed. Like, again, a bilingual spelling bee, I think, is an excellent way of being able to do so for our multilingual learners, or even at a PTO meeting, having an interpreter for families who don't speak English to be able to be there and also communicate and engage with the PTO, or in DCPS's case, the LSAT of having an advisory team of community members and parents and teachers within the school building to advise the principal, I think are excellent ways to build that sense of community, even after community hasn't been felt by certain individuals. But I think that's, again, years, decades long issues that I mean, the time is now to be able to rectify those issues and the unfortunate damage that had been done to not feel like they could be a part of it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and as just a note, here at School of Ed, our book club this year is reading The Containment, which is all about school segregation in Detroit, Michigan. So we too are, as a community, are having these really tough conversations, right, about issues of race in schools and children and communities at large. And like you said, you've explained, like, these are real conversations and they can be really difficult. But it's so important to come together in a community like this one to have those conversations too. So, thank you both for being here and for, contributing to that. We have some more questions. This is a really good one. During a conversation about how your work has shifted, JP asks, I'm curious to hear how you've seen things shift as a result of technology, AI obviously, but in general too. Do those changes make you feel optimistic or pessimistic?
Emma, do you have any initial thoughts?
I'm happy to jump in. This is something we think a lot about at the foundation. We have a sort of cross-portfolio strategy focused on AI. And I think here, like, I really try and hold both and. Like, I think the initial research we're seeing around AI is both that there are sort of incredible ways that the technology can support young people's learning and experiences, and there are clear ways that it can threaten or degrade young people's skill development at a really critical time. I think there's lots of factors at play here. One depends on how the tools are used and sort of deployed in classrooms by young people. I think there's a big difference between a very specific sort of ed tech tool used in context with a trained educator than sort of carte blanche access to ChatGPT at home in the out of school time hours. Like, I think we have to be careful not to sort of lump all use cases and experiences together. Um, and I think there's been some really interesting and important conversation around the sort of use of AI at different ages and developmental stages. So what is appropriate in the early childhood setting? I think the consensus is like very limited use of technology. What about at elementary, middle school, high school levels? So I think we're getting more nuanced about appropriate and sort of inappropriate uses. And then finally, I think there's like, I think we've been grappling with these questions, but I think there's even more sort of seismic change to come. And I think we're even starting to see that in the policy arena, sort of more engagement around what are appropriate uses of technology in the classroom and beyond. What are the guardrails needed to keep young people safe? And even some of the product developers starting to think about those, just thinking about character AI and sort of walking back some of the availability of social companions and so on. So, I think holding both pessimism and optimism right now is like probably the rational thing to do. And one of the sort of central tenets to us at Overdeck Family Foundation is sort of leading with evidence. So one of the places where we've made a lot of investment over the last year and a half is in sort of rapid cycle evaluation of AI-enabled tools to try and understand what are the benefits and what are the risks, and how can we lead with evidence rather than sort of fear-mongering or overly optimistic, ideas about what might be possible.
I think everything that Emma said is exactly how I feel about the transition and the rapid use of AI in different spaces, and particularly in education spaces. Um, I don't think anything that you said is not one that I like literally have the same thoughts on. I think one, so short answer, everything Emma said is exactly how I feel. Longer answer is one one thing I think about in, you know, kind of this the fear factor of, oh my gosh, is AI going to take over this job or this role or however. I don't think AI can it can't replace community building. It can't replace equity work. I'm curious to know if, if there are people who work in AI or, love AI, how they would say it drives either of those. Emma talking about, the companionship AI bots that, you hear some students using that I do have a lot of concern in because that's not how we community build. Um, that isn't something that can be reflected in the students that you sit with at lunch. It's not reflected in the PTO that you're working with. It's not built with the after school programs that you're in, the affinity groups that you join, et cetera, et cetera. That thankfully is something that I don't think AI can replicate and learn from enough to completely take over or change, however it is. I think the work that we do that is equity based, that's community centered, continues with real human bodies, real human brains. And if someone wants to challenge me on that, then again, I'd be curious to know what research has shown that says otherwise, or again, how it's driving that work that we're not already driving ourselves with the brains that we were blessed with and the hearts that we have for education. So, yeah, everything that Emma said, and then that extra piece about I don't think it can be replicated quite well.
Love it. I love both of those answers. Thank you so much. And we're gonna squeeze in one more question. And it's gonna be, a question that in all fairness, we could probably have a whole seminar on. So in the last few minutes, I would love you both to think about a question that Allison asks. What do you think are some of the differences in creating community in rural versus urban areas in this education space?
An interesting question. We work because our funding model is national. We work with nonprofits who work all across the US in many different states and geographic contexts. And so they are often navigating sort of just this question of how do I do work in New York City and how do I do work in North Dakota, and how do I sort of flex the model to be able to operate in both spaces. I think one of the things that we've heard among grantees working in rural spaces is really thinking creatively about the community assets that exist within that space, and then how to utilize technology to support connection across physical distance. So thinking about ways that sort of asynchronous or hybrid learning can sort of maximize access for folks in rural settings, thinking about sharing of resources, whether that be sort of like educator time or physical materials to be able to sort of maximize the availability of materials to support program implementation. And then finally, like really tapping into the community assets that exist. So what are the sort of features of that community? It may not be population density, but what else is available in that community that support learning goals that are related to the sort of educational mission of the program? So those are just some of the lessons we've learned from our grantees sort of as it relates to rural communities in particular. But one of the real treats of my position is to be able to work with organizations who are sort of operating across contexts and be able to think alongside them about what it means to implement a program well in really different community contexts and what adjustments might be necessary to the program model or program delivery to be effective in different settings.
I'm not sure if she's watching live or she might watch this later, but there was a fellow student of mine in the program. Her name is Jenny, and she was working, I believe, in Montana, as a teacher in special education as well. And me being in Washington, D.C., our areas were vastly different. That said, hearing about how she also similarly to how what Emma said of using resources around the surrounding areas to help support the families within the schools that she was supporting is one that I think was actually exactly how we do so in DC. There are plenty of organizations, agencies that help our students after school, during school, before school, during the summer, that I think are reflected very similarly in Montana, in rural areas, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious as I'm learning and working with more individuals who aren't in urban areas, how exactly that goes about when, maybe one of the furthest resources are fewer miles or more miles away than one of our in the urban space, maybe a mile or two away from a school. However, I think that the work is still very similar. We want to be using the resources that are already in place, and we want to make sure that we are directing families, directing students to those resources. But again, as I'm working with more friends or hearing about friends who are in these rural areas, they're teaching me about how they kind of like work through that, I guess, kind of pain, that working pain. But regardless, the fact that we're all doing it similarly, what resources, what community groups, what community spaces there are in a rural area versus an urban area, it doesn't matter. We're going to make sure that they get those resources is what makes it amazing, even if we're in completely different spaces.
And I think that's a wonderful note to end on tonight. So thank you both so much. Thank you, Trianna and Emma, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your inspiring stories and your insights with us and the Hopkins community tonight. Also, thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen to our conversation today. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation and this celebration and exploration of what it means to be committed to community in ed policy work. And we encourage you all to attend more of Hopkins at Home's free public virtual content in the future. So for more information on that, visit hopkinsathome.jhu.edu. Thank you all again so much. I hope you have a wonderful night.